Module 6. Quality Oversight. When it comes to outsourcing in the biopharma industry, quality must always be the number one priority. Patients are entrusting their health and often their lives to the medications they're putting into their bodies. The consequences of falling below these standards can be catastrophic, both to the patients and to the companies responsible. As a definition, quality oversight in the pharmaceutical industry is a systematic approach of ensuring that every drug produced meets the highest standards of quality, safety, and efficacy. This rigorous process includes continuous monitoring, evaluation, and improvement of manufacturing processes, strict adherence to regulatory requirements, and maintaining excellence throughout the product lifecycle. The pharmaceutical industry is highly regulated by bodies such as the FDA in the United States, EMA in Europe, PMDA in Japan, the CDSCO in India, NMPA in China, and many more. Quality oversight is crucial in meeting their regulatory requirements. Poor quality management will result in costly product recalls, which McKinsey estimates cost manufacturers $600 million on average. And this doesn't include the cost of lawsuits, reputational damage, and the potentially fatal impact on patients. Stephanie Goulding, Managing Director of Pharmatech Associates, now explains how to build quality oversight into your outsourcing partnerships.
My name is Stephanie Goulding, and I want to start our conversation today by talking a little bit about the fact that we as an industry rely on the relationships between drug sponsors and CDMOs and outsourcing partners to actually supply patients with high quality, safe, and effective medicines when and where they need them. And without this partnership, it really does result in a space where we can end up shorting patients or not bringing novel therapies to the market. But this symbiotic relationship that exists does have a little bit of tug in it between drug sponsors and outsourcing partners. And this kind of really centers oftentimes about the fact that drug sponsors are ultimately responsible for their finished products. They can't delegate that responsibility as much as an outsourcing partner might like to take on a responsibility. The reality is that the regulations, especially here in the US, and in many major markets around the world, don't allow for that full delegation of that responsibility. And what that means is drug sponsors are trying to figure out often the right level of oversight and how to go about providing that oversight for their outsourcing partners. And a lot of that kind of stems through quality units and quality relationships of quality agreements and the relationship between the quality agreement and a master supply agreement and navigating that complex space. And often what can really actually happen in that space is that we end up in a blame game. And this particularly occurs when things go wrong, right? Whether there's a manufacturing challenge, some technical issue that's arisen that maybe isn't resulting in quality defects or issues with product quite yet, but are proving to be maybe delaying the manufacturing process or just slowing things down generally. And then it kind of escalates upwards into quality issues, either with the product itself or quality issues in our outsourcing partners' facilities, which ultimately can lead to things like drug shortages or delayed approvals on novel therapeutics. And this blame game where we all kind of sit around the room, whether that's a virtual room or an in-person space, we're pointing our fingers at each other, trying to figure out what went wrong, who's to blame. And often that's really a sign of where a relationship has maybe gone off course. And in order to kind of talk about, well, how do I avoid this with my outsourcing partners? We really need to start at the beginning and think about this from a sourcing perspective as we begin that journey. And really that question starts by an inward look. And what I mean by that is that it starts by understanding your own organization's culture and preferences. And a lot of people don't think about this. You know, they've got a new product that's in development. They're all excited. They want to start manufacturing clinical material. So they're reaching out to potential partners and they haven't actually thought at all about how they like to work. And often what that leads to is a very quickly escalating situation when things don't go well. And you end up around that conference table or in a virtual conference table, kind of having that blame game conversation. And if organizations can spend a little bit of time maybe before they start to do that outreach and think about, what does this relationship look like? What are those successful outcomes? How do we want to see the day-to-day operations in terms of communication, escalation, other types of issues that might arrive? How do we want to handle critical issues or decision making between the two partners or the two entities? What's your level of risk? Not all organizations accept or tolerate the same levels of risk. And when you look at that, that can be extremely crucial when you're talking about a relationship with an outsourcing partner, because if you're super conservative and maybe they're willing to accept some risk, that may lead to a lot of those kind of disagreements. Um, Additionally, you can look at things like flexibility, trying to find what success looks like for you, for your company, for your patients, for investors, maybe, and really try and understand the drivers on your side that could lead to or could enable or potentially derail a partnership with an outsourcing partner. And where that really feeds into in the process is building what I like to refer to as the right kind of checklist to go through this sourcing adventure, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. And what I really mean by the right kind of checklist is look at oversight, in the organization. How do they run their organization? And take all of that information, compare it with your preferences in an outsourcing partner. Also, take a moment to look at culture. There's a lot of focus sometimes on getting quality assurance to come in and do quality audits as a part of that supplier selection process. But the reality is sometimes we fail to look at the cultural element of an organization, and looking at that in that selection process builds and starts a foundation for, I'm picking this partner not just because of financial considerations, technical considerations, business considerations, but because I think they're the right person or entity to partner with from a cultural perspective. They align with us, they fit, right? It's not going to be a constant tug of war between the two entities. And the reason I like to talk about the fact that you want to think about building the right kind of checklist and you want to focus on those cultural elements is that there are a lot of benefits to having a strong cultural alignment with your outsourcing partner. And that starts with everything from innovation and adaptability, where that strong cultural fit really actually drives and allows both organizations to embrace innovation, to be adaptive in their day-to-day work, right? It drives continuous improvement and that kind of chase for innovation, which ultimately can also lead to the next piece, which is risk reduction and mitigation. So when you've got a good cultural fit and you've had those conversations about risk tolerance, in advance of actually identifying a risk, right? This reduces the potential for misunderstandings, misconceptions, miscommunications, and other kind of conflicts that can arise because there's a fundamental misalignment around risk, right? It also it reduces the inherent risk associated with our oversight and execution of specific projects and implementation of various programs with outsourcing partners, because we have a highly functioning team that's culturally aligned and works well together. These two pieces also help to lead to long-term sustainability. When you start to talk about cultural alignment in a partnership, partnerships that have that tend to last longer than partnerships that don't. Sometimes we get into something where we haven't taken a look at what that culture could look like, and you end up in a space where, oh my gosh, this is not the partner I want to be with for the rest of the product's life cycle. And now you're triggering additional work between tech transfers and regulatory filings and those types of things that if you had maybe stepped back and looked at culture at the beginning, and continued to cultivate that through the right kind of oversight with your partner, you're going to see a longer term, longer lasting partnership. You'll also see improvements like the ability to enhance the collaboration. The collaboration and teamwork gets really robust, really fast, um, really almost seamless between the two entities. In some cases, it may not even feel like a separate entity. It works so well that it feels like an extension of the drug sponsor. You'll also see things like improved trust, no more of those blame game situations where you're in a conference room and people are accusing others of, well, you're responsible for our delay to get the product out the door. It's way more cooperative, resilient, and trusting in that relationship, which again helps feed that long-term sustainability. And again, that last kind of outcome or benefit of this strong cultural alignment, and the reason that I like to start these oversight conversations with the cultural piece, is you get increased productivity and efficiency. You're reducing misunderstandings, you reduce miscommunications, you reduce conflict. It means you're going to be able to be more efficient. You're going to be more productive. You're going to work through your projects, deliver product on time and in a very smooth fashion. Won't say you won't have hiccups along the way, but your resiliency and your relationship, the trust you have, the understanding of risk tolerance leads to a space where that project and that delivery runs very smoothly. But when we come and talk specifically about looking at quality oversight with our outsourcing partners, what this really means is that there really is a spectrum of oversight that can be applied to an outsourcing partner. And that's everything from a hands-off approach, which means basically you're not, as a drug sponsor, you're not providing any kind of oversight really at all, to the other end of the spectrum, which is really micromanagement. You are in everything that they are doing. You are involved in every meeting, every decision, and that really ultimately leads to a decreased efficiency in projects execution, bringing products to the market, working through troubleshooting when and where issues arrive. Where organizations really want to try and reach is this place that I like to refer to as tailored oversight. Don't treat all of your outsourcing partners the same way. They're not all going to have the same strengths or challenges. And if you've done the right kind of due diligence up front, which we'll talk about how that kind of fits in a moment, then you can actually adjust the level and rigor of your oversight based on the relationship you have with the supplier. So for instance, let's say you're entering into a contract with a new outsourcing partner as a drug sponsor, and you can come at this from a standpoint of, they're new. I don't know a lot about them other than what I learned in our selection and due diligence process. So therefore, maybe my oversight's going to be a little bit higher. But as I get to know them, as we really see that cultural alignment take shape and get rooted in the way that we work together, you may decide that there's elements of trust that have been built and strengthened, and that you're willing to adjust that oversight in certain areas and maybe not look at every piece of paper because you have confidence that their manufacturing organization is producing quality records and their internal QA unit does a detailed review, and that you don't have to repeat that work that they're doing. You focus on looking for exceptions or circumstances that might require some additional thought process before maybe you release a batch, but you don't look at everything. And that's where I refer to, you get into a tailored oversight. And to really accomplish this, one of the pieces is, I've talked about and shared my thoughts on building oversight plans and how to do that and how to structure that. But one of the tenets of doing that is that they're not stagnant. They should be updated. They should be reviewed. They should be kept current. And as your relationship grows, it gets deeper, it gets better, you have the opportunity to fine tune and to maybe share a bit more responsibility where you can as a drug sponsor with your partner. So I think that when you look at that spectrum of oversight, you really want to take into consideration where you are in your journey, where your relationship is with this partner, and what you need to do. And it's almost like a knob. What do you need to increase and what do you need to decrease? And where do you set each knob on each individual element? And really, this is part of, as I've talked about, as I've gone through this, a larger supplier or larger outsourcing framework that is built on things like risk management, knowledge management, data management concepts. Gaining that understanding initially as you go through these early stages of really bringing to play a new supplier, planning to bring them on, understanding who you are, understanding what you're looking for, going through that selection and evaluation process. And what I talked about in terms of oversight really kind of comes into play once you've built that relationship, once you've gotten it off the ground, and you go into this ongoing cycle where you're in a level of either semi-routine or routine production. Certainly more challenging in a clinical stage organization than maybe a commercial stage product. But you're going to have ongoing monitoring, performance assessments, feedback communication, and that needs to be driven by documented oversight plans. How are you going to approach that? How are the two organizations going to work together? What metrics and KPIs are we actually looking at? How are we going to look at the relationship versus the supplier performance or our outsourcing partners performance? And how's our issue escalation working? Are we encountering any issues there? Is it working? Or do we need to fine tune anything? And this ongoing partnership can either evolve in a very positive and productive way, or can almost devolve into a negative experience. So, for me, when I go back to where we started our conversation, it's at the beginning with the fact that you want to be culturally aligned, because that's going to enable a more successful ongoing space. And it also makes the exit plans a lot easier, because you'll get that transparency up front and early in the process if something's changing on their end, or you're likely to be very transparent with your outsourcing partners if things are changing like on your end, especially as it comes to maybe sale of an asset to another drug sponsor, et cetera, that you've got that strong relationship to be able to navigate through that. And again, I just wanted to be able to provide some context for both drug sponsors and outsourcing partners on really the importance of that cultural understanding and aspect as it relates to building a strong relationship, as well as tailoring the oversight for working with your outsourcing partners. So thank you very much, and hope you have a great day.
Please now download the Outsourcing Oversight template, which Stephanie Golding has created to accompany this module. When you have read that, please take the quiz to test your learning.